Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now going to be moving on to the other game that took place last night, where we saw the Dallas Mavericks able to lead their way to victory against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Storyline coming into this game, which is a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time did sort of play out in real time, was the fact that Luka Doncic had this new sort of approach to the game where he wanted to make sure that he was spending less time talking to the referees and the officials. And this is something that Luka has always definitely had the reputation of somebody who can be a little loud in terms of voicing his displeasure with the officiating. But it seemed like during the playoffs, and part of the sort of theories around it was the fact that he was dealing with this injury anyways, and that already sort of had him frustrated, and he almost expected the referees to be a little bit more forgiving to him because he was dealing with these injuries. And it was just leading to, frankly, a little bit of nonsense in terms of him really going at the referees on a consistent basis, and a lot of people were getting fed up with it. But he was looking to change his approach heading into this game, and he ended up putting up one of his best performances so far of the postseason. I would argue, personally, the best that he's looked yet. 31 points, 11 assists, 10 rebounds. Finally shot well again from the field, 12 of 22, 5 of 11 shooting splits. So definitely a good sign for Dallas. And early on in the game, they did report at least that if this were a regular season scenario, Luka would probably be sidelined for at least 2 weeks with this knee injury that he's dealing with, but he is sort of working through it. And I thought that last night he did move pretty well, all things considered. We've seen him, it hasn't necessarily been a linear situation with him where we've seen him sort of have his ups and downs in terms of how does he look from a physical standpoint up to this point in the postseason. So I'm definitely not ready to say he is finally past it. This is something he's going to be dealing with for the entirety of the playoff run here, but at least he did look good last night. And I think that he was the very much needed, offensive creator for this Mavericks team that, again, we are just seeing the development of this defense in real time. And that's what's been getting it done for the Mavericks in the postseason so far, is they are just about completely eliminating the paint and forcing other teams to hit the perimeter shots against them. And that should be a recipe that would be in favor of the Oklahoma City Thunder, considering how well they shot during the regular season. But it just hasn't necessarily been the same case last night, where we see them go 25% from three. It took them a while to get going. I think that Chet Holmgren and his three-point shooting, not that I would blame this much. There are a lot of things you can sort of point the finger to before you point to Chet Holmgren in terms of why the Thunder are down in this series. But that being said, would be definitely a lot nicer to see the Chet Holmgren three-point shot falling, because of the fact that we haven't necessarily, I feel like that would be such a massive piece, and we see it on individual reference or individual points of the games where Derek Lively, especially later in the game, was at least getting pulled out onto the perimeter, which was opening up the paint a little bit more for them. But Chet in this series, he is shooting just 25% from three, and because of that, the Mavericks don't have to necessarily, clear their big men out of the post to go stand by Chet on the perimeter, which would absolutely open up the lane for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was incredible in this game once again. And I think that it's a simpler thing, and this is somebody who, coming from somebody who has not played in the NBA, and it's not that complex of an idea, but you see every time Shai is very aware of where the big men on the court are for Dallas. And every time he has an opportunity to get to the rim where the Dallas big man is sort of trailing him, he does so and gets a lot of damage done there. Along with the fact that his mid-range shot is just ridiculous how consistent it is. And, definitely viewed as one of, not just viewed as, but statistically, it is one of the least efficient shots in the NBA, but Shai just doesn't abide by that. And a lot of people, once again, last night sort of coming at Shai for the flopping and such. I just can't stand the discourse that goes on with a lot of NBA fans, but Shai is just about all that is effective right now on the offensive side of the floor for Oklahoma City. And this Dallas defense seems to have really figured them out. You are getting incredible minutes from Derek Lively, where, if you've noticed, he's the one who's closing a lot of these games, which is a little bit of a surprise because Daniel Gafford has been also very solid for them. But we saw the Hack-A-Lively situation after, I believe it was Game 4. And he sort of just beat the case of the Thunder thinking they can get away with just sending him to the free throw line on repeat, where he was very effective from the free throw line after it seemed like he settled in a little bit there. So for the Mavericks, I think that this was good to see that they don't need to necessarily lean extremely heavily on this Luka and Kyrie dynamic. PJ Washington had a couple huge games for them in games 2 through 4 last night. Didn't necessarily have the same shooting touch, scored just 10 points, and it was Luka sort of by himself. Kyrie has definitely been very quiet over the stretch of recent games, and I've praised him a ton for the fact that he does seem a little bit more okay with allowing his entire team to get into the game before he just sort of goes into ISO ball in these situations, which I do stand by. There is going to need to be a time where Kyrie steps up once again, but as long as you're winning, I'm never going to necessarily tear you down in that aspect. And Game 4 probably would have been nice to see him step up a little bit more. Only scored 9 points, but in this game, they didn't necessarily need him to do so, and I thought that this was very encouraging for the Mavericks as a whole. Sort of on the side of the Thunder, I talked about Chet Holmgren, but one of the big stories coming from the Thunder was the fact that they finally pulled the trigger on taking Josh Giddey out of the starting lineup, which is, it's definitely a decision. I think that I wouldn't say it was a must-do move by any means, because you do sort of have the potential of screwing up the dynamics of the team. The TNT crew was hitting on this at halftime as well. Isaiah Joe didn't necessarily seem like he was very hyped up coming into this game, picked up a couple quick fouls. He never necessarily made an impact. And then Giddey coming off the bench, he actually did all right for himself in this game. When he first checked in, it was around the 4-minute mark, I think, left in the first quarter. I was a little bit surprised that when they did so, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was still in the game. I feel like they would maybe be better off trying to stagger the minutes a little bit. But, regardless, Giddey was all right off the bench. Maybe this is the way they decide to move on here through the rest of the postseason. I wouldn't say it necessarily, ignited anything in them, because the rest of the offense, and I don't think it matters who necessarily is in that 5th spot in terms of their starting lineup. There isn't a ton else going for them, and Jalen Williams, the stats haven't been horrible for him, but something I did notice was the difference on his drives, where he was one of the best players this season in terms of attacking the rim and getting himself going on drives. During the regular season, he was shooting something like 50%. It was above that. I can find it right here as I sort of scramble a little bit. But Jalen Williams during the regular season was a very effective player in terms of getting downhill and we've just seen his shot percentage really drop, where during the regular season he was shooting 53% on his drives, and so far in the postseason we have seen that drop off to 45%. Actually went up after last night, because I think going into it was in the 30s. So again, step in the right direction at least, but it has not been the same version of Jalen Williams that we saw during the regular season, and he's somebody that the Thunder absolutely need in order to sort of overcome their own youth, which is of course a conversation that's going on with this series. We knew that the Thunder at some point were going to run into a little bit of a bump in experience wise, but who's going to be the player to sort of take them out of it? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing just about everything he can, but he is going to need some assistance, and right now their number 2 guy during the regular season hasn't necessarily been doing so. Like I mentioned, Chet, I don't think that he's been bad, but the fact that he isn't able to sort of keep the defense quite as honest around the perimeter as they would prefer, and the Mavericks are just clicking defensively. So the Thunder are going to head into an elimination game. They next play on Saturday, so we'll see how that plays out. Dallas is currently favored by 4.5 points on ESPN Bet. They're going to be home. Let me know what your thoughts are for the remainder of this series, but we are going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other end, I have some thoughts on the NFL schedule release, which came out last night. We have the full 2024 slate, so we are going to be diving into that. Stick with us, and we will be right back.